Okay. And we'll try to pick back up. The gentleman you're looking for is right over here. There's an elegant lady coming around, I think your way, perhaps. All right. Well, we'll pick back up where we were last week. I'm going to skip over a whole bunch of stuff from last week, and I'm going to skip over a bunch of stuff as we go, simply just because our time is so limited. I've already put together a file of the slides here, and would be very happy to share that with you. It has a lot of things we didn't cover in class, and it's got some of the references on there, etc. But even more than that, if there's anything that I've mentioned at any point that you are wondering about, that you may not agree with, I welcome that. Would love to talk to you. We may not be able to get into an awful lot in class, but I would love the chance to talk with you, especially if there's anything I've said that you doubt its accuracy, etc. I mean, truly, I just welcome that. And here's the thing: if you can show me to be incorrect on something that I found, I will thank you for that. Because with any subject, whatever it is, my quest is constantly to refine my understanding. Again, no matter what the topic, biblical, scientific, whatever, I want to constantly be coming to a better understanding than what I currently have. So if there's anything that you can actually, show me where I am incorrect, I'm serious. I will thank you for that. And you can at least be sure I will give strong, serious consideration to anything that you have to show me. But that's also, you might say, maybe kind of a little bit of a challenge. Bring your best, okay? If you want to tell me that yeah, I got it wrong on something, that's fine, but you got to show me so that we can both refine our understanding, all right? So I welcome that. All right, so we talked last week about maybe some assumptions that get made about evolution. Just to give you the overall view, we've talked about the universe coming into existence somehow, either because of a creator or without one, okay? We've talked then about the precise organization of the universe and the galaxy and the solar system and this planet and the carbon atom and et cetera. And what are the odds of that happening without someone designing it? We've talked about life coming into existence on this planet, even what we might call so-called simple life, which is quite complex. We've talked about the efforts to try to see how that could have happened without a creator or to make it happen, etc. And we're now down to the fourth part, which is the kind of life that we see, including you and me and this machine that we live in and all of the life around you, etc. And so we're really looking at a couple of possibilities for that. And there are currently, in current thought, there are three major possibilities, you might say. Just trying to give you the overview so before we plot back into the detail of where we were. One is that there is a superior entity, a deity, who created and specifically designed the life that we see around us, including us. A second is that this happened that there was abiogenesis, that is, living material somehow arose from non-living material on this planet and then evolved without guidance to what we see now. And a third is something you might say a little bit of a hybrid between those, often called theistic evolution. And this is a view very widely held among a number of people, not just those, a lot of people who may not believe in the God that is the God of the Bible, but still, it's very prevalent that a lot of people may feel like, yeah, there's no way those first three things happened without some influence, but I believe that evolution took over from there, okay? So that's theistic evolution. So that's kind of the three major possibilities of thought about how life came to be. So we're going to, I've skipped over a whole bunch of stuff, but I'll just tell you this. So we're looking at evolution because whether it be, and I'll come back at the end of this discussion and talk a little bit about theistic evolution, but first let's just see, does evolution of any flavor, from any original cause, either set in motion by a deity who then let it proceed, or from non-living material on this planet because there is no deity, etc., etc. Let's just talk about, does evolution make scientific or intellectual sense? So that's what we want to. That's where we've plopped into today, and I'm gonna leave out a bunch of stuff, but I'll share it all with you, as I said, if you want. If you're interested, I am too. All right. Evolution cannot be directly tested. Obviously, there's no experiment you can design to test whether evolution occurred on this planet. So, in the strictest definition, it's not actually science. Okay. Because that would be the definition. But we can examine a lot of evidence about evolution, and we ought to, and we can potentially falsify it. Now, when Darwin first put this theory forth, there was no way to test it at all. There was no way to falsify it potentially or disprove it. It was a theory, etc. But I still say it was a very original piece of thinking on Darwin's part, especially for the day that he was in. Come on in, I guess. So I think no matter how it arose, whether it's pure science or not, who cares? It's a prevalent theory. It deserves our attention. I think that we have to do that if we're trying to be fair. And it does bother me a little bit when some people say, look, I believe Genesis. It doesn't bother me that people believe Genesis. Hear out the whole sentence. It bothers me if people say, I believe the Genesis account. I don't want to hear anything about evolution. It's not true. It's heretical, and I don't even want to know about it. Well, that kind of bothers me. Because if you're not willing to look at all sides of something and reconsider what you believe, you might not really be looking for the truth. So I hope that we would all, no matter where you currently stand, I hope that we would all be willing to scrutinize our beliefs, etc., and be willing to change or refine our understanding if it doesn't fit with the evidence. So I don't know what could be more fair than scrutinizing the evidence for evolution, for or against, etc. That doesn't happen a lot of times. Sometimes, as you'll see, actually that is avoided by people on both sides. Of whether I say both sides, not that are opposed, but whether you believe evolution is factual or not. So let's take a look at some of that and see, does the evolutionary theory, does it have credibility? Does the evidence support it? We ought to be able to look at some, and now in this day and age, we can look at some evidence for or against. And finally then, based on that, does it make more sense than the idea of creation by a superior entity? That is, does it have greater power to explain what we see than the idea that a superior entity did this? But you have to examine it for yourself. I don't care, like I said, no matter what you're inclined to think about evolution, you can't take somebody else's word for it, all right? You can't say evolution didn't happen because the preacher said so. Might or might not be right. You can't say that it did happen because your textbook said so, and your science teacher said it was a proven fact. None of that's good enough. You've got a brain, so let's use it. Okay, and if you just read the headlines and the conclusions, what you will learn, I put in quotes, is that, there's no doubt about evolution. It's rock solid, it's incontrovertible. Everybody with a brain knows that it's true. And I didn't put their names up here, but there are some very prominent atheistic authors who will tell you that anybody who doubts evolution is just having a creationist tantrum. Okay, I don't like that any more than I would like it the other way. Richard Dawkins is one. In fact, here's his entire quote. He says about evolution, he says, anybody who would deny that evolution is true and factual is either stupid, ignorant, insane, or perhaps wicked, although I would rather not think that. All right? I don't like that stuff coming from either side. But, that's pretty arrogant. That's pretty vitriolic. But, never mind. Does that sound like a rational, intellectually honest search for truth to you? Any more than the person who would say, I don't want to hear about evolution because the Bible says otherwise. So let's take a look at a critical analysis of the evidence. And I'm going to just break it in 5 parts, but that's just me, okay? And you may or may not like that. That's fine. But just, put it all together. Never mind how I broke it down. Let's look at all the evidence that we can consider about this. And then we'll come back with some concluding analysis about it. All right. So here's the way the 5 parts I want to look at the evidence for or against evolution is this. First of all of the evidence that affirmatively, demonstrates evolution, that definitely supports evolution and is specific to evolution. And I hope you know what I mean by that. That is to say, it supports evolution and it is not consistent with creation instead. Does that make sense? Okay. Hypothesis specific. It definitely supports evolution and not creation. So that'll be the first part. The second will be, we'll see if there's evidence that should be available if evolution is true, but maybe hasn't been seen. There may be some evidence that contradicts evolution. We'll look at that. Some that perhaps is shifting, and I'll show you what I mean by that, because it may have moved from one category to another the more we learn about it. And then finally, the rational, convincing, specific biologic mechanisms for evolution. All right, so let's take a look at that first one.
Is this evidence for the classical version of evolution or the theistic?
No, I'm not separating the two right now, because, good question, he asked, are we talking about like atheistic evolution or theistic evolution? I'm lumping them together. Okay, because if evolution makes sense, then we can decide whether, with or without an original creator. But if evolution doesn't make sense, then it doesn't matter which, if it's not true, then it can't be theistic or atheistic, Okay, so good question, but I'm lumping them all together for now. So let's talk about the evidence that very specifically and definitely supports evolution. You're looking at it. Daniel.
Nylon-eating bacteria.
Coming to it.
All right.
Okay. And I have already shared my slides for all of this with some, and as I said, would be happy to do that. We're going to come to nylon-eating bacteria and some other things a little bit later on. Okay? But I'm going to tell you there isn't any. Now,
But Steve, you said we're coming to it, but why is it not in the slide?
it is. It's not in that slide.
Well,
It's in a couple of more slides. I can't put everything on one slide.
you didn't put anything on the slide.
You are correct, and you're going to see why. Okay, at least work with me here. I don't mean accept what I tell you, but give me a chance to tell you. Okay, please. All right. Here's the thing. The evidence that is typically claimed as illustrating evolution, that is, animals especially, but plants too, whatever, that are just unbelievably adapted to their environment. Okay? You see it everywhere. It's incredible, and we all know that. It's incredible, no matter how it happened. But what you're going to see is that most of that, it could be compatible with evolution, but it also could be very well compatible with creation. And so I'm going to show you, and you'll have to stick with me for a few minutes to do it, but that there is no evidence that specifically, affirmatively supports macroevolution. Here's an example, the platypus, okay? And I'm no expert on the platypus, but just one more amazing animal, one of 10,000s of amazing animals that is so perfectly suited for its environment, etc. So, and that's one frequently, I've heard a friend of mine who now lives in Australia commented, he said, how can anyone look at the platypus and not believe in evolution? All right, well, let's consider that. Is it, if you see an animal that is just, perfect for its function and its environment, etc., is that consistent with evolutionary theory, and is it specific for evolution? The first answer, yes. Okay, if I see an animal like a platypus that is just unbelievable, it's just amazing, it's like, wow, how in the world could this have happened? Is that consistent with evolution? Yes. That is to say, if evolution is correct, then yes, it would produce results like this. It would produce, mine's not the best in the world, but our human body, in general, amazing, absolutely amazing. Is that consistent with the evolutionary theory? Yes. If evolution is true, you would, and if it is true in the way that we think it could be, then yes, it would produce amazing things. Is it specific for evolution? No. The fact that the platypus exists like it does and that you and I exist like it does, well, that doesn't tell me that it happened by evolution. It doesn't tell me how it happened, just the fact that we're here. I hope that makes sense. All right? So state it the other way. If the platypus or anything else is just beautifully adapted, is that consistent with intelligent design and creation? Is it specific for that? Well, yes, it's consistent, because if there's a creator, we would see amazing things like we see. Okay, so either theory could account for that. Is it specific for intelligent design? No, it could have happened by evolution. The appearance of design ought to be a strong inference for design, but it's not a proof. Okay, it's not specific for intelligent design. Yes?
If the platypus was created in its form at the beginning, how, so specifically suited for a particular environment, how would it survive all this time through drastic environmental changes throughout the millions of years?
Maybe because it was that well designed to be able to withstand those changes throughout the years.
Well, it's a very
Or-
specific environment that it's suited for.
Yep. It may be suited for a lot of other environments too that it hasn't been put in yet.
Like ice ages and...
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, but what I'm saying is either evolution or specific creation could account, if true, could account for things like the platypus.
That's what I'm trying to say, is I don't think it does.
Okay, I would, you'd have to convince me of that or show some evidence that it couldn't have been designed.
That's my question, is how would it survive through varying climates, varying completely disparate environments over very...
How about really good design? Really good evolution or really good design, either one could account for exactly that. I mean, are you suggesting it could not have been designed well enough to withstand environments?
Yes.
Well, all I can beg you is open your mind, because I'm telling you either evolution or good design could account for the existence of this.
I'm saying that Earth has gone through such drastic changes in the past that no specific organism could have survived it could have survived all of it together.
Well, and many of them didn't. There are many species that are extinct. They didn't survive. The ones that are alive perhaps did survive. If you have some evidence to show me that they didn't, the fossil record says they have survived. If you have some evidence to show me that they didn't, I'd be happy to examine that. Tim?
You have to make the assumption too that the environments that you're talking about were over the total part of the earth all at the same time.
That's a very good point. A platypus may have survived in one area that didn't freeze quite so hard.
Right, you have to have a total frozen
Yeah.
earth. I don't know.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, there's one example of possibility of exactly how that could happen. So look, I'm being open-minded enough to say that either really good evolution or really good design could account, if they were true, could account for the life that we see. To say that neither one could possibly have done it, you have just shut off your thinking of possibilities. I'm not saying that you have, but if you lay down that, then you have just refused to consider a possibility. Greg?
And I think there's a difference in being able to adapt and evolving.
Yeah.
I'm a mechanical engineer. I've designed machines for 40 years, and you design something to be able to adapt or withstand certain conditions.
Yes.
Now,
Temperature ranges and...
Will my Toyota truck turn into a Maserati? Maybe by the time we get home, I'd like to think so, but I doubt it. But a design can adapt to
Yes.
its environment.
In fact, and that's something we will look at, there are some things that strongly suggest that they may have been designed in to give the capacity to adapt. The human immune system would be one. That it is either evolved or designed to accommodate things it hasn't seen yet and be able to figure out how to produce antibodies to them, et cetera.
And what I add, on a scale that we can't imagine.
Absolutely.
It is so far beyond our ability to
Yeah.
imagine what could be put in there.
Yeah, but we're starting to get glimpses of it. You're right. But yes, there's a whole world that of knowledge that we've not yet figured out and discovered. Much more than what we have, that's for sure.
Is that the same thing as microevolution?
Okay, we will talk about so-called microevolution, which is natural selection.
Oh, okay.
That is survival of the fittest, which is an absolute true phenomenon that you can observe. There's no doubt that, and some people call that microevolution, but natural selection, as we will see, there's no doubt about that being true. The best adapted organism will be the one that survives, or that survives in the greater number for sure. So, well, this is exactly what we're talking about. I will tell you that most of the things we see of, kind of the seeming almost perfection of life, not perfection, but you know what I mean, would be consistent with either one of these theories if the theory were true. But they're not supportive. I'm sorry?
Does a platypus breathe oxygen?
I don't know. I'd have to really go look at my knowledge on platypi.
I guess I'm making the assumption that yes, a platypus breathes oxygen. But
I think they do.
Do any animals breathe oxygen?
Do any animals breathe oxygen?
Sure.
Yes.
Then how do they survive through periods where we have significantly reduced oxygen in the atmosphere? Where we have completely different atmospheric compositions, how do these animals survive to today?
Well, okay. That is such a what if. I think that'll be a great discussion for you and me to have at another setting.
I'm saying you're positing that there is no evidence for evolution that doesn't rule out all these animals existing from the same time from the beginning. I'm saying that I think there are. And I feel like that when if you're coming at this from saying we have to consider all options,
yeah,
you can't start shutting down options just because it doesn't
No.
match with what you're trying to say.
No, I'm not shutting down options. Okay, but you'd have to prove that there was a time when there was insufficient oxygen on Earth to support animal life.
Okay, we're playing a different ballgame here. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna rule out something based on that assumption, then you have to give me some evidence for that assumption. That there was a time when there was insufficient oxygen to support animal life.
Okay, show me papers that say that there was. I mean, we're
I'm not telling you there was.
Okay.
I'm saying that I think that there has always been sufficient oxygen on the planet to support animal life.
Okay.
At least from day 6. Anyway, but that's conjecture for the moment. I mean, show me otherwise. But if you're going to rule out something based on something that you think happened, you'll have to convince me that phenomenon happened. All right. Well, let's talk about evidence that is, I will tell you, missing, but must be present for evolution to be true. And I'll show you beginning things that should be observable. In fact, things that must be found or observed if evolution is to be accepted as true, but are conspicuously absent instead. That makes sense for missing evidence? All right. Given Darwin's theory, and of course he put it forth at a time when we didn't know about DNA and genetics, and I give him a lot of credit for original thinking, whether I agree with him or not. Okay, but given his original theory of, gradual changes, and now there's a little more specificity to that of how might those changes occur with genetic mutations, one stacked upon another, and with the advancements that we have. Well, here's something that was true then, and he recognized it, and is true now, 160 years later. If there is this unending sequence of gradual changes based on genetic mutations, etc., giving survival advantages, then we should be finding actually millions upon millions of these in-between forms, transitional forms, throughout the fossil record. They have to be there if the evolutionary theory is true. Okay? So they should be everywhere. Of all of these in-between things with minor changes, etc. But the fossil record doesn't contain any of the evidence of these ongoing, continual, gradual changes. Now, several very good paleontologists, almost all of whom are atheists — I'm not trying to take anybody out of context here, I'm not trying to twist their words, not at all. And some of them are theistic evolutionists, and so I'm not trying to twist anybody's words here. But there are any number of highly recognized paleontologists that have acknowledged that of the fossil evidence that we have, like for primates, for example, apes, humans, etc., that all of the fossils we have for what's believed to be transitional forms would fit in a shoebox with enough room left over for a pair of shoes. And I didn't make that up. I'm quoting a paleontologist with that. The evidence is not there. Here's what Charles Darwin said. The number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed would have to be truly enormous. That is, given if his theory is true. Okay, that's very evident. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate lengths? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. This is Darwin. And this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be argued against this theory of evolution. Darwin said, yeah, those things, they have to be in the fossil record or this theory of mine can't be true. And he says, and we're not seeing them. He says, so yeah, that's the most obvious and the most serious objection to my theory is where are these forms, Daniel?
I think that that is at least plausibly explainable by it's just difficult to make fossils, that you just sample it more rarely than you'd like to.
Well, he said, okay, here's what Gould said, and I'll come back and give you Darwin's observation on that idea in just a minute. Okay, Stephen J. Gould is passed away a few years back. Very noted, you might say, evolutionary biologist, paleontologist, etc. Definitely an evolution believer, definitely, okay? Probably an atheist, I'm not sure about that. Noted for being a really decent guy and a very, very smart guy and a very honest guy, okay? I'll take that all day long. Let me show you something that Dr. Gould said about this. He says the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record is, he says, that's kind of the trade secret of paleontology. That is to say, that's what we all know, but we don't talk about it very much, is that we don't have these fossils that ought to be there. Okay, that's what that means. He says the evolutionary trees, I'll show you some in a little bit, that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. Okay, we have all these different, categories of life, amphibians and reptiles and humans and etc. He goes, we don't have, they always show you how what arose from what, and then amphibians split into reptiles and birds and all this stuff. He goes, we don't have the information of how they all connect. That's all kind of interpolated by inference. He says all we really know is that we have reptiles and we have amphibians, etc. That's what he's saying here. He says the rest, all that in between of the branching, it's inference. We're guessing that's what's about. He says, I think it's reasonable inference. He believes that it happened. He says, I think it's entirely reasonable, but it is inference. It's not demonstrated. Okay? He says, yet Darwin was so invested, wedded to gradualism, that he wagered his entire theory on a denial of what the fossil record shows. Here's Gould quoting Darwin. The geological record is extremely imperfect, incomplete. Okay, and this is what you're kind of referencing a moment ago. Darwin said, it's got huge gaps in it, and that's because we haven't found it yet. So what Darwin says is, and he says this will to a large extent explain why we don't find all these things that have to be there, connecting together all of these, forms of life, etc. So Darwin's saying, yeah, it has to be in the fossil record or my theory is wrong. And it is in the fossil record, we just haven't found it yet. That's what Darwin is saying. And he says, and if you don't believe that, then yeah, you would then be justified in rejecting my entire theory. If you don't accept my guess, or not my guess, but my contention that they are in the fossil record, we just haven't found them yet because we haven't hit the right places yet. All right, that's Gould quoting Darwin. So Gould says further, Darwin's argument still persists, he says, as the favored escape. Now, mind you, he's not a creationist criticizing, he's an evolutionist, okay? He says this is the favored escape of most paleontologists from the embarrassment of a record that seems to show so little of evolution, a fossil record. In exposing its cultural and methodological roots, I wish in no way to impugn the potential validity of Darwin's, gradualism. He says, for all general views of evolution have similar roots. He says, I'm not saying Darwin was wrong. I'm just saying there's big problems here. This is Gould. He says, I just wish to point out we don't see it in the rocks. Maybe it happened, but the record of it is not there. Gould goes on to say, paleontologists have paid an exorbitant price for sticking with Darwin's argument. We fancy ourselves as the only true students of life's history. Yet, to preserve our favorite account of evolution by natural selection, we view our data, what we can actually see, it's so bad that we never actually see the very thing that we profess to study. That's just an honest admission of how this evidence is missing. I'll close with this for the morning because I know that we do need to let you out of here in a few minutes. Well, maybe this and maybe one more slide, maybe. Okay. Colin Patterson. And this is, if you want to have a copy of my slides later on, the references, as you can see, are all here. Okay. He puts out a brand new textbook on evolution. Okay, and he is a highly credentialed person. He put out a textbook, a new one on evolution. And somebody wrote to him after getting his new textbook, writes back in and says, how come you didn't show us the transitional forms in there? He's like saying, great textbook, but hey, it would have been greater if you'd have showed us some of these transitional forms. Here's what the author writes back to him. I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. Yet Gould and the American Museum people are hard to contradict when they say that there are no transitional fossils. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. And this is a guy who just wrote a textbook on evolution. He says, yeah, I wish I knew of some. I would have put them in my book, you bet. I don't know of any. And Darwin would say, well, they have to be there. Yeah, that's agreed. And Darwin says they are there, we just haven't found them yet. We got to keep digging. And 160 years later, we still haven't found them. They're still not in the fossil record because he would have us believe we still just haven't hit the right places yet where they all are. All right, Patterson, then later on he said, yeah, I got to quit saying things like that because people keep using my words to, as if there were problems with the evolutionary theory. He says, I need to be a little less candid. All right, but we're now told that the fossil record does support the theory. Well, did something change? Did they find something? Oh, believe me, it would be, if you still read paper newspapers, it would be in headlines this big at the top of the first page if somebody could find a transitional form somewhere. But instead, what you're starting to see now is papers coming along saying, okay, look, quit looking for the evidence. We all know it's true. We may not have the details, but we just know it's true. So, kind of like cut it out, people. quit questioning the truthfulness of this because of the missing evidence. Yes.
I would say all forms are transitional forms. It's not that you're missing transitional forms. Every single fossil you see is a transitional fossil. It's just how often you're sampling the continuum.
Yes.
Anytime, and there's enough generations that you can count that as a continual process. Anytime you're taking a continual distribution and making a finite number of samples, you're going to have sampling that only occurs at a certain frequency in that sample. It has nothing to do with missing things. It's just you can only take so many samples, and fossilization is a rare occurrence. That's just not fossilizing as much as you just happen, whatever your preference is of how often you like it.
Okay, you raise a good question there. But what we have is you've got these forms fossilized, and then you've got a huge jump. Actually, we're going to come to this because Gould, that gave rise to Gould's version of evolution, which I think is based on a very good observation. You can say everything's transitional, but we don't have this. So again, if you say that, you're assuming there were things in between that just didn't get fossilized. But where's the evidence for this?
Where's evidence against it? What I'm trying to say is that it's consistent with the theory.
It's conspicuously missing, and that's where we're going to actually pick up next week. And in fact, you may want to look ahead at some of the slides, which I welcome you to do, because even Gould saw this as such a problem. And a lot of people now try to say, well, every form is a transitional form, so I don't even understand the question. But where are all the millions in between that we have no evidence of them existing? You can assume that they existed, but we ought to see some evidence of their existence.
That's what I just said, is that you're just taking a finite sample. So, I mean...
We're taking all the samples we can. I mean, people are digging like crazy.
I'm saying that the original fossilization is the finite sample, that it only occurs sometimes, so you're only catching it every now and then.
Well, you're catching a lot, because there are layers going all the way back to the very beginning.
Sure.
Okay, so anyway, well, we'll have to finish this, a little bit later on. I think, Hunter, you mentioned
Just real quick, I mean, of all the verses in the Bible that talk about creation, I always kind of go back to Psalm 19:1. The heavens tell the glory of God, and the skies announce what His hands have made. Day after day they tell the story, night after night they tell it again. If we believe that the Bible in its entirety is true, it's hard to believe that God did not create.
Yeah, you've jumped to the end. Hunter, good observation. But and in fact, I included that verse when we were talking about the universe a few weeks back, etc. And the only reason that I'm not emphatically saying there's the proof is because unless we decide on an intellectual basis that a deity exists, then I'm not using the Bible as the proof of it, because that would be a little bit circular. I happen to think your observation is quite correct, but that's a later conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, I've kept you over. Thank you very much, and thanks for the very good discussion here. I appreciate it, and please grab a whole lot of food. Call your friends and relatives and tell them there's food here. Hope you have a good week ahead.